In the 1994 film Forrest Gump, directed by Robert Zemeckis, Tom Hanks plays the title character who lives through several tumultuous decades in 20th century America, as many historical events like the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and the Vietnam War play out in the background. In this video, we'll take a look at how the film uses subtext to convey key story points along Forrest's character arc. Per usual, there will be spoilers for the film, so I recommend checking it out before proceeding further. If subtext is the meaning underneath the surface of the scene, we can also think of it as what the scene is really about. Subtext is found underlying lines of dialogue, as well as emotional interactions between characters that create key turning points in their relationships and in the overall story. In addition, for Forrest, we see his arc taking him from his childhood through his teens into adulthood, becoming a war hero, a sports celebrity, a wealthy business owner, and finally a husband and father by the end of the film. We see significant milestones in his life. At several points in the film, there are key revelations about characters that are revealed to the audience, but not necessarily to Forrest, perhaps due to his slow-witted nature. Forrest is portrayed as a simple, kind-hearted man who moves in and out of different scenarios, not always realizing the impact he's having on other people's lives or on historical events. For example, when Forrest sees his crush Jenny on stage playing the guitar and singing, he doesn't realize that it is at a strip club. The camera actually cuts to behind Jenny, revealing that she is naked except for her guitar. We hear Forrest's voiceover revealing his thoughts, believing that Jenny has achieved her dream to become a singer. But we, as the audience, realize that this is far from the truth and that Jenny has run into hard times. It's this contrast between Forrest's naive perspective and harsh, sad reality that is frequently used throughout the film to convey subtext. If we ask what is really happening in the story world of the film, we could recognize that it captures a time when the world, especially America, was going through tumultuous times in the 1960s through the 1980s. Unlike Forrest, other characters in the film are experiencing their lives falling apart. Jenny goes from one abusive relationship to another, wrestling with drug addiction and suicidal ideation. Another character, Lieutenant Dan, loses his legs in the Vietnam War and struggles to find his purpose in the aftermath, plagued by self-loathing and anger. Subtext plays a huge part in the storytelling of this film because we as the audience are piecing together and recognizing the harsh reality that Forrest initially is not processing. Often we don't hear Forrest relating key story points in his very present voiceover. One scene that reflects this technique is when Forrest is recovering from his war injuries at a base camp hospital during the Vietnam War. He talks about enjoying all the ice cream he can eat and offers some to an injured Lieutenant Dan who lays in a nearby bed. But the next key story beat is revealed when a medical orderly comes by to help Dan onto a stretcher, and we see that Dan has had his legs amputated. The way the scene is staged is intended to inform us as the audience of what happened to Dan and what will be a motivation for his arc moving forward. Another use of subtext is after Forrest and Jenny spend an intimate night together and then she leaves the next morning without saying goodbye. Forrest responds by starting to run outside, which turns into several years of running cross-country that becomes a media sensation. It never becomes clear in dialogue or a specific story beat on why Forrest started and kept running, but we know that before he started his run, Forrest had confessed his love to Jenny, asking her to marry him, and she had finally responded later that night that she loves him. So if we dig deeper into the sequence of the film, the subtext is likely that Forrest ran in order to process the loss of Jenny leaving him. The film continually builds Forrest's love of Jenny as one of his primary motivations, so it would not feel right if he didn't react strongly to her leaving him. Perhaps Forrest didn't know how to respond to Jenny leaving except to simply start running, as that is something she often told him to do. In one of the later scenes after Jenny dies, Forrest stands at her grave under a large tree that they used to sit in when they were kids. It's a poignant scene where Forrest is faced with the loss of his wife, the one person who had given him purpose to protect and to pursue over the years. As Forrest talks to Jenny at her grave, I think the scene is really about him not knowing what to make of the painful nature of life when it comes to loss and grief. He has lost other people in the past, including his mother and his friend Bubba, but Jenny's death hits him the hardest. For the first time, Forrest is not shielded from the harsh nature of reality when Jenny dies. He says that he doesn't know if we all have a destiny, or if we're just floating along in the wind, or if it's a mix of both. His existential wrestling in this painful moment draws us in because we can all experience moments like this, where we are asking what is the meaning and purpose of our lives, and how do we make sense of it. In fact, it is some of the most meaningful questions we can ask in our lives. So overall, Forrest Gump as a film uses subtext to draw the audience into what's happening at a deeper emotional level for its characters, touching on the pain of living a finite life over time. The film crafts a specific perspective through Forrest's eyes and asks us to question our own values and how we see our time in this world.